Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I used to think funerals were quiet, heavy things, filled with slow-moving sadness and polite, tearful whispers that barely skimmed the surface of real grief. But standing there in that old church, smelling of worn wood and lilies that were already starting to rot at the edges, I realized funerals were much louder than anyone admitted, not with noise, but with the unsaid things crashing against the walls of your chest like a damn freight train. Mom looked peaceful up there, or at least as peaceful as a body full of regrets and unfinished conversations could look, dressed in the blue dress she wore to my high school graduation. The one she never really liked but wore anyway because I told her she looked beautiful in it. The room was packed with people who had long since stopped calling, faces I recognized from childhood barbecues, PTA meetings, and those terrible Christmas parties where the fake smiles were thicker than the smell of cinnamon candles. And in the thick soup of formal black clothes and murmured condolences, I spotted my sister Emily standing in the front row, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue she didn't really need. I didn't feel much watching her. Maybe that was the first warning bell, the first tiny crack that told me today wasn't just about mourning, but about something breaking wide open. I was standing near the back, half-shadowed by the heavy velvet curtain, when Aunt Linda, Mom's sister, who looked like she'd been chain-smoking regret since '97, shuffled up beside me, her hand brushing my elbow like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to touch me. "You know," she whispered, voice rough like gravel and whiskey, "she left everything to Emily, right?" For a second, just a breath, the whole room seemed to slow, the air thickening into something I couldn't swallow, and I turned my head just enough to see Linda's bloodshot eyes peering up at me with a mix of pity and something nastier. Something that smelled like satisfaction. I nodded once, short and sharp, like a man taking a bullet square in the chest, because yeah, I already knew. I had known for 2 days, ever since the lawyer called me while I was still trying to figure out how to get my black suit dry cleaned in time for the service. I had known it when he stumbled through the legal jargon, his voice awkward and apologetic, telling me there was no property, no savings, no jewelry box tucked away for me, only a curt, final note in the will, everything to my daughter, Emily, with love and gratitude. Not my children, not Mark and Emily, just Emily. And standing there, next to the woman who used to sneak me extra cookies when Mom wasn't looking, I felt the cold fingers of rage scratch down my spine, but I kept my face still, my hands jammed deep into my pockets where no one could see them shaking. Because I knew something no one else in that godforsaken room knew. The night before she died, my mother sent me a video. Not a message on a voicemail, not a pretty little letter folded up with a spritz of perfume, but a raw, shaky video shot on her ancient iPhone, the kind she used to curse at because it always froze at the worst damn times. And in that video, with her voice thin but steady, she said one sentence that spun the whole world off its axis. Aunt Linda patted my arm like I was a dog that just got kicked and needed comforting, then melted back into the crowd, her job done, her little grenade tossed neatly into my lap. I stood there for a long minute, staring at the cheap brass light fixtures swinging gently in the draft, hearing the preacher drone on about forgiveness and grace and life everlasting. And all I could think about was that damn video burning a hole in my pocket like a loaded gun. Now, maybe you've been there, maybe not at a funeral, but maybe in some room, some family gathering, when you find out something so messed up, so upside down and backward, that it changes how you see everybody standing around you. If you have, I want you to drop it in the comments, because I swear to God, there's no loneliness like standing in a room full of people who think they know the truth when you're the only one who's seen what's hiding underneath. Anyway, the rest of the funeral passed in a haze, people hugging too long, hands gripping too tight, platitudes thrown like rice at a wedding, all meaningless and sticking to me like damp paper. I managed to make it through the prayers, the eulogy Emily read with just the right amount of trembling in her voice, the slow shuffle of black shoes down the aisle. The forced smiles at the reception where casseroles and cookies made out of guilt were piled high on plastic tables. But the whole time, the video was a weight in my pocket, heavier than my keys, heavier than my grief, heavier than anything I had ever carried before. And the thing is, when you know you're holding the match that could burn the whole house down, every fake smile, every lie, every hug starts to feel like dry kindling stacked around your feet. I didn't watch the video again right away. I didn't need to. I could hear her voice clear as a bell in my head, whispering that one sentence over and over, a slow drumbeat that was going to drive me insane if I didn't figure out what the hell to do about it. "Mark," she said. "Mark, I'm counting on you to make it right." 8 little words. And not a damn clue what she meant. It was one of those nights where the silence in the house feels almost alive, breathing slow and heavy against the windows, where the kind of thoughts you usually push down with the busy noise of the day start crawling up your spine and whispering in your ear when you least want to hear them. I had poured myself a glass of whiskey, the good kind I usually saved for pretending life was going somewhere better than it was, and sat down in the old recliner by the window, watching the streetlights flicker and the wind twist the branches into gnarled, grasping fingers. My phone buzzed on the side table, rattling against the wood with that cheap, hollow sound that always made my heart jump a little harder than it should, and I almost ignored it because what good news ever came after midnight anyway? But something in me made me pick it up, some gut-deep instinct that tonight wasn't going to be like the others, and there it was, a message from Mom. Just a short video file, no text, no subject line, nothing except her name sitting there on my screen like a weight I could already feel pressing into my chest. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the play button, because part of me already knew this wasn't going to be a love you, good night kind of message, not the kind you save and smile at when you're feeling lonely 3 years later. This was going to hurt. When the video started, I almost dropped the phone because it was her face, tired and soft, lit up by the dim yellow lamp on her bedside table, the one she always said made her room feel like a sunset. She looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow, like life had been quietly chipping away at her while I had been too busy with work and bills and the endless grind of pretending I was doing okay. Her hair was mussed like she had been tossing and turning, and she wore that old worn-out flannel robe I bought her one Christmas when I was too broke to get anything better, the one she swore was the softest thing she ever owned. "Hey, baby," she said, her voice cracking just a little on the first word, and I felt that crack echo somewhere deep inside me, somewhere I thought had closed up years ago. She smiled, that small, private smile she used to give me when I came home late, and she pretended not to be waiting up. "I know I don't have much time," she said, and right then I knew this wasn't a casual goodnight. This wasn't a thinking of you moment. This was goodbye, the real kind. The kind you do when you know tomorrow isn't coming. She took a deep breath, her fingers fiddling with the edge of her blanket like she was trying to find the courage to go on, and for a second she just stared at the screen, eyes glistening, searching for me through the glass like she could pull me closer if she just tried hard enough. "I need you to listen carefully," she said, her voice steadier now, full of that stubborn fire that used to terrify my high school teachers and make the neighbors think twice about parking in her spot. "I made some choices," she said, "choices you might not understand right away." She paused, biting her lip the way she always did when she was scared, but trying not to show it, and I swear I could feel the seconds stretching out between us, a tightrope strung across the impossible distance of life and death. "I'm counting on you, Mark," she said, leaning closer until her face filled the screen, her eyes boring into mine, even through time, even through grief. "I'm counting on you to make it right." That was it. No explanations, no apologies, no maps to follow or names to curse, just that one sentence, dropped into my lap like a live grenade with the pin already halfway pulled. And then the screen went black. I sat there for a long time after the video ended, the whiskey forgotten, the night pressing in around me until it felt like I was drowning in it, replaying her voice in my head over and over, trying to peel back the layers and find the meaning hidden in that thin, fraying goodbye. All the old memories came rushing back then, sharp and vivid as broken glass, the good ones and the bad ones tangled together in a mess I didn't know how to separate. I remembered the nights she stayed up sewing my Halloween costumes by hand because we couldn't afford store-bought ones, stitching love into every crooked seam. I remembered the time she missed my 8th grade band recital because she was working a double shift at the diner, and the way she cried on the porch afterward, her hands shaking as she hugged me too hard and said she was sorry over and over like it could ever be enough. I remembered the fights, too, the screaming matches that left holes in the drywall and bruises on our hearts, the nights I swore I'd leave and never come back, the mornings when we sat across the kitchen table pretending not to notice the silence still bleeding between us. She wasn't perfect. Hell, she wasn't even close. But she was mine, and I was hers, and now she was gone, leaving me with a half-finished puzzle and a note that said, "Good luck." I didn't tell anyone about the video. Not Emily, not Aunt Linda, not even Jake, my oldest friend who knew every skeleton rattling in our family's closet and had helped me bury a few of my own over the years. It was mine, a secret stitched into the lining of my grief, a promise I wasn't sure I knew how to keep. And somewhere deep down, colder and darker than I liked to admit, part of me wondered if keeping it secret made me just as much a liar as the rest of them. But I wasn't ready to share it yet. Not when I didn't even understand it myself. Not when the fire it promised to start would burn through everything we had left. Not when the last words my mother ever spoke to me were still ringing in my ears, louder than the crying, louder than the prayers, louder than the hollow, bitter sound of dirt hitting her coffin the next morning. "Mark, I'm counting on you to make it right." 8 words. One impossible task. And not a single goddamn clue where to start. The lawyer's office smelled like old carpet and newer lies, a sterile, suffocating kind of space where even the sunlight slinking through the blinds seemed ashamed to touch anything inside. I sat stiffly on a cracked leather chair that squeaked every time I shifted, my hands jammed between my knees like a kid waiting outside the principal's office, while Emily perched across from me with the poise of someone who already knew she had won the game before it even started. Mr. Barlow, the family lawyer, an old man who had probably forgotten more legal loopholes than he remembered, shuffled a stack of papers with slow, deliberate movements that made me want to rip the folder out of his hands and scream, "Just get it over with already." He cleared his throat in that dry, phlegmy way that people who have spent too many decades breathing stale office air tend to do, and then he began reading, his voice droning like a far-off engine revving up for a long, miserable drive. Mom's will was short, almost insultingly so, a handful of pages that boiled down her whole life, her love, her debts, her sacrifices, into cold bullet points that sounded like they belonged in a spreadsheet instead of a legacy. To my daughter Emily, he read, his voice as emotionless as a grocery list, "I bequeath the family home, all financial assets and personal belongings of sentimental value, with love and gratitude for her support and companionship." There was a long, echoing pause after that, like even the universe was wincing at how badly it hurt to hear it said out loud, and in that gaping silence, Emily shifted slightly in her seat, smoothing the wrinkles in her skirt with the kind of careful, rehearsed grace that only someone expecting a reward could pull off. And then Mr. Barlow turned a page, his brow furrowing slightly as if searching for a line that might not even exist, before adding, "There are no other beneficiaries listed. No mention of me. Not a damn word." It was like I had been erased, scratched out of the story like a typo, not even important enough to deserve a leftover piece of furniture or a half-empty box of old photographs. Something inside me twisted hard, a slow, sour feeling blooming in my gut like a bruise, and for a second I thought about standing up, flipping that cheap oak desk right over, and demanding to know what the hell had happened to the promises she had made me when I was a kid crying myself to sleep because she was working double shifts just to keep the lights on. But I didn't move. I didn't say a word. I sat there, breathing through my teeth, feeling the weight of the unspoken words settle into the marrow of my bones, heavier and colder than anything I had carried before. Because deep down, buried under the anger and betrayal, was a whisper of something worse, doubt. Maybe she had loved Emily more. Maybe all those years of patching my mistakes, of bailing me out of bad choices and worse friendships, had finally taken their toll, and this was her final way of telling me that I had disappointed her one too many times. Mr. Barlow slid a small, formal envelope across the desk toward Emily, and she picked it up with fingers that didn't tremble, smiling just a little too tightly to be real, her eyes flickering toward me with a flicker of pity that felt sharper than any knife. I wanted to punch that look off her face. I wanted to scream that it wasn't what it looked like, that I wasn't the fuck-up she had always believed I was, that there was more to the story than a neat little will typed up and notarized in some stale office. But instead, I bit down so hard on the inside of my cheek I tasted blood, and I told myself to wait, to breathe, to hold on just a little longer. Because I still had the video. I still had her last real words to me, the ones no lawyer, no scrap of paper, no smug smile from Emily could take away. And what she said in it, what she trusted me with, wasn't just for me. It was a torch, a lit fuse, a door cracked open on a truth too big, too dangerous to be handed over to a woman like my sister who had spent her whole life learning how to play sweet while stabbing knives into people's backs. The meeting wrapped up quickly after that, as if everyone was eager to get out before the stink of betrayal stuck to their clothes, and I watched Emily tuck the envelope into her purse, her movements sharp and efficient like someone snapping the final piece into a puzzle. I stayed behind a minute longer after they left, just sitting there while Mr. Barlow fiddled with his papers and avoided looking me in the eye, and I wondered if he knew. If he had seen the truth buried somewhere between the lines, but had decided it wasn't his business to say it out loud. In the end, I stood up, nodded once without meaning it, and walked out into the sunlight that felt too bright, too clean, for the kind of ugly, heavy thing that had just happened inside those four walls. The parking lot smelled like hot asphalt and exhaust, and I stood there for a moment, staring at my truck like maybe if I looked hard enough it would offer me some kind of map for where to go next. But all I had was the video. All I had was a dead woman's whispered promise and a future hanging by a thread so thin I could barely see it. As I climbed into the truck and slammed the door harder than necessary, I realized the worst part wasn't that I had been left with nothing. It was that now I had everything that mattered, the choice, the responsibility, the damn weight of it pressing down on my chest until it hurt to breathe. And somewhere deep inside, in that dark place that never really healed, I knew the next move wasn't going to just change my life. It was going to tear this family apart. Or maybe, if I was lucky, it would finally show the world who we really were underneath all the lies. There is a kind of silence that fills a house after a funeral, a thick and heavy thing that settles into the corners and seeps into your skin, whispering reminders that no one is coming back. That no one is going to walk through the door and tell you it was all a bad dream. After the reading of the will, after the awkward hugs and hollow condolences, after the bitter taste of betrayal had curdled in the back of my throat, I found myself sitting alone in my living room with a bottle of whiskey that had started out half full and was now dangerously close to empty. The old clock on the wall ticked loud enough to make me flinch, every second carving a deeper line into the raw, festering place where my sense of belonging used to be, and no matter how many swigs I took, the buzzing in my head would not die down. I played the video again because part of me, the desperate and broken part, needed to hear her voice, needed to find some loophole or hidden meaning in her words that would tell me I had not been abandoned, that I was not as disposable as the papers signed in Mr. Barlow's stale office suggested. "Mark, I'm counting on you to make it right." The words didn't get easier to hear no matter how many times I let them bleed out of the cheap speakers on my phone, and the more I listened, the heavier they became, pressing down on me until my shoulders ached from carrying them alone. I stared into the glass of whiskey like it might hold an answer if I squinted hard enough, seeing not my own reflection, but fragments of old memories, pieces of a life that never seemed to fit together the way it should have. There was Emily, younger, brighter, standing on the porch with her golden hair catching the sunset while Mom clapped her hands and told the neighbors how smart and sweet her little girl was. Her voice thick with pride in a way I could never quite earn no matter how many trophies I brought home. There was me, scuffed knees and a stubborn skull, trailing behind, holding up a science fair ribbon like it was a prize from a war. But Mom barely sparing it a glance because Emily had just gotten a solo in the church choir, and wasn't that just the most wonderful thing in the world? There were nights spent alone at the kitchen table, my math homework blurring under tear-streaked eyes, while Mom worked double shifts and left Emily to braid her hair and paint her nails, too busy to notice when I stopped asking for help altogether. And then there were the fights. God, the fights, shouted words that rattled the windows, accusations that sank their claws into the wallpaper and never really let go, moments when I saw something like hate flicker across her face and wondered, even as a kid, if maybe love was not the default setting between a mother and her son. Was it my fault? Was it my temper, my stubbornness, my endless need for her attention that wore her down until there was nothing left but obligation and regret? Or was it her, broken and human and scared, doing the best she could with a heart stitched together by years of disappointment and dreams that never got off the ground? I didn't know, and the not knowing clawed at me harder than the whiskey burned my throat. I leaned back in the chair, letting the weight of it all crush me for a while, because fighting it felt like trying to punch smoke, and in the thick fog of memory and alcohol, I replayed the video again, this time watching not just her words, but her face. The way her eyes started away for a second, the way her fingers twisted in the blanket like she was holding back more than she dared to say, the way her voice caught right after she said my name. Those were the details I clung to like a drowning man grabs a piece of wreckage. Mark, I'm counting on you to make it right. It was the pause right after that sentence that caught me this time, the way her mouth opened slightly like she was about to say something else, something more. But then she pressed her lips together and shook her head almost imperceptibly, as if she had decided it was better, safer, to leave it unsaid. And for the first time, I realized maybe the video wasn't just a goodbye. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe making it right wasn't about taking revenge or demanding my share of the inheritance. Maybe it was about uncovering something much darker, something she had been too afraid to speak out loud, something that lived in the long shadows between what we thought we knew about each other and the truth we all spent years trying to bury. The thought hit me so hard I almost dropped the glass, sloshing whiskey over my knuckles, but I barely noticed because the room had started spinning for an entirely different reason. If there was more to her message, if there was something she had wanted to say but hadn't dared to, then it was up to me to find it. No one else was going to look. Emily sure as hell was not going to dig up anything that might stain the perfect little legacy she now owned outright. And Aunt Linda had already made it clear that she was content to sip her cheap wine and let the family rot from the inside out without lifting a wrinkled finger. It was me. It had always been me. Maybe that was why she left Emily the house, the money, the jewelry, all the pretty, empty things that looked good on paper but meant nothing in the end. Maybe she left me the burden because she knew I was the only one stubborn enough, broken enough, furious enough to carry it without dropping it halfway through. The thought made me sick with a kind of hollow, furious pride. She had trusted me with the truth, even if it broke me to find it. And by God, I was going to find it, no matter how many memories I had to dig through, no matter how many skeletons I had to pull out of the closet. Because somewhere in the wreckage of what we were, there was a piece of her final, desperate hope still breathing. And I was not going to let it die. The first time I saw Emily after the will reading, it was at Mom's house, though by then I guess it was technically her house. The front steps already swept clean and the flower beds neatly trimmed like she was in a damn hurry to erase every trace of the woman who had spent 30 years fighting to keep this place from falling apart. Emily stood on the porch, her arms crossed over her chest, the sunlight catching the faint gleam of a new gold bracelet at her wrist, a bracelet I knew damn well she had not been able to afford last month when she was crying broke to Aunt Linda and begging for gas money. She smiled when she saw me coming up the walk, that tight, practiced smile she had worn like armor since we were teenagers, and for a split second I almost believed it, almost let myself think that maybe blood was thicker than betrayal. That maybe she wasn't about to gut me with that same easy grin. "Hey, Mark," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear with a casualness that made my teeth hurt. I was just cleaning out some of Mom's old stuff. You know, making it mine. The way she said it, mine, with that little lilt of ownership, like Mom's life had been a prize she had finally collected, made something ugly and molten bubble up under my ribs. But I swallowed it down because part of me was still desperate to believe that we could find some way to survive this without ripping each other apart. "Thought you might want to take a few things before they go to Goodwill," she added, her voice syrupy sweet, but her eyes darted past me like she was already bored with the whole idea of keeping up appearances. Inside the house, it was worse. The living room, once cluttered with crocheted blankets, framed photos, and the endless knickknacks Mom swore she would sort through one of these days, was already half gutted, the walls stripped bare except for the ghostly outlines of where the pictures used to hang. Boxes labeled "Donate" were stacked neatly in the hallway, and every time I caught sight of Mom's handwriting on the edges of a book cover or a recipe card tossed carelessly into a pile, it felt like another tiny death. Another piece of her life discarded without a second thought. Emily floated from room to room, her voice high and cheerful, narrating all the plans she had for renovations, knocking down the kitchen wall to open the space up, replacing the hardwood floors with something modern and clean. Maybe even repainting everything a fresh white to brighten the place up. And all I could think was how easily she talked about erasing the woman who had scrubbed these floors on her knees, who had patched every crack in the walls with spit and prayers when there wasn't money for real repairs. At first, I tried to tell myself it was just grief making her act like this, that maybe this was her twisted way of coping, that maybe if I gave her time, the real Emily, the one who used to make me birthday cards out of construction paper and glitter when we were kids, would show up again. But then I started noticing the cracks. Little things she let slip when she thought I wasn't really listening, comments about how free she felt now, how much easier her life was going to be without all that drama dragging her down, how she planned to cash out some of Mom's jewelry for a well-deserved vacation. It was the way she said it, too, laughing lightly like it was some private joke between her and the universe, like grief was just another thing she had checked off her to-do list. When Aunt Linda stopped by with a casserole and a strained smile, Emily barely looked up from her phone long enough to say thank you, and when Cousin Jeremy offered to help her sort through the attic, she brushed him off with a brittle politeness that made it clear she wanted no one hanging around longer than necessary. It didn't take long before the story she was spinning, the dutiful daughter who had lovingly cared for our mother, who deserved every penny and every square foot of this house, started to unravel at the edges, loose threads tugged loose by her own arrogance. Money Emily supposedly needed for repairs was being spent on spa days and designer shoes. The family heirlooms that were priceless memories somehow started appearing on online auction sites under anonymous usernames. And through it all, she kept smiling that same damn smile, wide and bright and utterly hollow, as if daring anyone to call her out, knowing most of them wouldn't because confronting the truth was so much messier than swallowing the lie. I found myself standing in the middle of the stripped-bare living room one afternoon, fists clenched at my sides, staring at the dent in the doorframe where I had once thrown a baseball too hard and Mom had laughed instead of yelling. And I realized I was standing at a crossroads that I had been avoiding for days. I could let it go, pretend none of it mattered, let Emily rewrite the past however she wanted and walk away with everything like the world owed her a goddamn medal. Or I could blow it all up. Tell the truth. Play the video. Force everyone to see that the golden child was nothing more than a polished lie wrapped in a pretty bow, a smiling blade pressed against the throat of the family. The thought of it thrilled and terrified me in equal measure, the way standing on the edge of a rooftop does, that dizzying mix of fear and freedom pulling at your gut. But if I jumped, if I set the match, there would be no going back. No more pretending we were just a little broken, just a little lost. No more safe lies to tuck ourselves into at night. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for the fallout, wasn't sure if exposing her would feel like winning or just like losing one more thing I could never replace. Because at the end of the day, she was still my sister. The only other person who remembered what it was like to sit at that scratched-up kitchen table, eating burnt grilled cheese and listening to the radio crackle through another long, lonely night. Maybe she was the best liar I had ever known. But she had learned from the best. And somewhere deep inside, where even the whiskey couldn't reach, I wondered if I really had the guts to light the match, or if I would just stand there, trembling while everything burned around me anyway. There are moments in life when you realize you are carrying something too heavy for just your own two hands, moments when the weight of what you know starts to hollow you out from the inside, turning your guts into cold, hollow steel that rattles every time you take a breath. It was 2 days after the disaster at Mom's house, and I still had not made a move, still had not lit the match that was begging to be struck, still had not answered the question that kept dragging me down into the cold, black water of my own indecision. So, I did the only thing that made sense when you are standing on a cliff and cannot tell if what you are seeing below is water or jagged rocks. I called Jake. Jake and I had been friends since kindergarten, had survived bad breakups, bar fights, job losses, and the kind of drunken mistakes that would have gotten lesser men killed. And if there was anyone on this miserable planet who could handle the whole ugly truth without blinking, it was him. He met me at McMurphy's, the dive bar we used to sneak into in high school, a place where the lights were low, the beer was cheap, and nobody asked questions you did not want to answer, and as soon as I walked in and saw him nursing a warm bottle of Coors Light, I knew I had made the right call. Jake was the kind of guy whose face carried the permanent weathering of a man who had seen more than his fair share of bad days and had made his peace with it, and he didn't say anything when he saw me, just tipped his chin up in that small, silent way that meant, "You want to talk, you talk." We sat for a while in the kind of silence that is too comfortable to call awkward, two men chewing through 1,000 unsaid words while the jukebox played old country songs in the background, and I nursed a whiskey that tasted like regret soaked in gasoline. Finally, when I could not stand the buzzing in my skull any longer, I pulled out my phone, slid it across the table to him, and said, "Play it." Jake raised one eyebrow, but he didn't ask a single goddamn question, just plugged in the earbuds I handed him, hit play, and leaned back in the booth with a look on his face like a man strapping himself into a roller coaster he was pretty sure was held together with duct tape and prayers. I watched him the whole time, watched the small, almost invisible changes, the tightening of his jaw, the narrowing of his eyes, the way his hand clenched the edge of the table when she said it, when she dropped that bomb that had been ticking away inside me for days. When the video ended, he pulled the earbuds out with a slow, measured movement, set them carefully on the table between us, and leaned back in his seat with a sigh that sounded like it had been clawing its way out of him for hours. "Jesus Christ, man," he said, rubbing his hand over his face, "your mom didn't just drop you a secret. She dropped you a goddamn hand grenade." I nodded because there wasn't anything else to do. Thinking about showing it to the family, I said, my voice low and rough, already knowing what he was going to say, but needing to hear it out loud anyway. Jake stared at me for a long time, his eyes dark and steady, the way a man looks at a friend standing with one foot in a grave he is about to dig himself. "Sometimes, man," he said, his voice so quiet I had to lean in to hear it over the buzz of the bar, "the truth just fucks everything up worse." He let the words hang there between us, heavy and sour, and even though every stubborn bone in my body wanted to argue, to shout that the truth mattered, that it was the only thing that mattered, some part of me already knew he was right. Telling the truth was not a clean, noble thing. Telling the truth was a blood sport, and everybody who got close enough to hear it was going to get splattered whether they deserved it or not. And yet, not telling it, swallowing it down, letting it rot inside me felt like a betrayal worse than anything Emily had ever pulled. Jake leaned forward, resting his arms on the table, his voice dropping even lower. "You sure your mom wanted you to burn it all down?" he asked, and for a second, I hated him for putting that doubt in my head, hated him for forcing me to look at the possibility that maybe Mom had not meant for this truth to see the light of day. Maybe she had just needed someone to know, to carry the weight of it so she could leave this world lighter than she lived it. Or maybe she had trusted me to be the one person too stubborn, too furious, too goddamn heartbroken to let it stay buried. I didn't know. And the not knowing was worse than any answer. I sat there in that dingy booth, staring into my drink like it might spell out the solution if I stared long enough, while Jake just waited, giving me the space he knew I needed to find whatever ugly, painful truth was hiding in my gut. And that was when it hit me, the real weight of what she had said, the thing that had been scratching at the back of my mind since the first time I watched the video. It wasn't about the inheritance. It was never about the house, the money, the jewelry. It was about a debt someone owed. A debt Mom could not collect herself, not anymore. And somehow, whether I wanted it or not, that debt had been passed down to me, wrapped in whispered words and shaky cell phone footage, waiting for me to decide what to do with it. I didn't know who owed it yet or what it would cost me to call it in, but I knew one thing with a certainty that shook me down to my bones. This was bigger than me and Emily and whatever petty jealousies we had nursed over the years. This was a reckoning. And it was coming whether we were ready or not. Jake finished his beer in one long pull, set the bottle down with a dull thunk, and looked at me with something between pity and respect in his eyes. "Whatever you decide," he said, "you better be damn sure you can live with it after." I nodded slowly, my hand curling into a fist under the table, already knowing that whatever came next, there was no living with it, not really. Only surviving. And some debts were never paid off in full, they just came due when you least expected it, sharp and bloody and inevitable as the edge of a blade. The decision, when it finally came, did not crash down like a thunderclap or burst through me like a bullet. It settled instead, slow and heavy, like a winter fog creeping over a dead field. The kind of thing you do not really notice until it is all around you and there is no way back out. I made the choice one sleepless night, sitting in my truck outside Mom's old house, Emily's house now, though I choked a little every time I thought of it that way, staring at the windows glowing warm and inviting against the dark, knowing exactly what kind of cold things lived behind them now. It would happen tomorrow. The family was gathering again, some half-assed memorial potluck thrown together by Emily to pretend we were all still a family, that blood alone could glue the broken pieces back into something worth keeping, and for the first time since the funeral, everyone who mattered would be under one roof. That was when I would do it. That was when I would pull the pin and toss the grenade and let the truth do what it was always going to do, whether I had the guts to admit it or not. I told myself it was about justice, about loyalty to the woman who had trusted me with her final, desperate words, but deep down I knew it was also about something uglier, revenge, raw and bitter, the need to make them all hurt the way I had been hurting. The way she must have hurt carrying this secret alone. I spent the whole next day in a haze, the video burning a hole in my pocket, a silent, living thing that seemed to grow heavier with every hour that passed, and by the time I pulled up to the house, my hands were shaking so badly I had to sit there gripping the steering wheel until the worst of it passed. Inside, the air was thick with the smells of casseroles and grief polished up to look like celebration, and the walls seemed to hum with the tension that nobody wanted to talk about, the sharp little glances, the false smiles stretched too tight across faces that had grown used to swallowing the truth. Emily was holding court in the living room, a glass of white wine dangling from her fingers, her laugh just a little too loud, her eyes just a little too bright, and Aunt Linda was perched nearby like a vulture waiting for the first sign of weakness. I waited until everyone had eaten, waited until the wine had loosened their tongues and lowered their guards, and then I stood up, clearing my throat, my heart hammering so hard I thought for sure they could hear it rattling around inside my chest. "I need to say something," I said, and just like that, the room went dead still, forks frozen halfway to mouths, conversations cutting off mid-sentence, the weight of attention slamming into me all at once. Emily's smile faltered, just for a second, and Aunt Linda set her glass down with a soft but definite clink, her eyes narrowing in that way that told me she already knew trouble was coming. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulling out my phone, the screen already queued up to the video, and raised it slightly so everyone could see. But before I could hit play, before I could let the truth out into the open air, where it could never be stuffed back inside again, Aunt Linda's voice cut through the silence, sharp and cold and trembling, just a little around the edges. "Don't," she said, and for the first time in my life, I saw real fear in her eyes. Everyone turned to look at her, confusion rippling across the room, and Emily's face went pale, the blood draining out of her cheeks like someone had flipped a switch inside her. "You don't understand," Aunt Linda said, standing up slowly, her hands spread in a desperate, pleading gesture I had never seen from her in all the years she had ruled over family gatherings like a drunken queen. "You don't know what she was asking you to do," she said, and suddenly the ground shifted under my feet, the certainty I had been clinging to crumbling into dust with every word she spoke. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice rough, the hand holding the phone trembling now not just from nerves, but from something colder, something worse, doubt. Aunt Linda closed her eyes for a moment, took a shaky breath, and when she opened them again, they were filled with something I had never seen before. Not anger, not resentment, but guilt, raw and bleeding and ancient. "Your mother wasn't asking you to expose Emily," she said, her voice breaking. "She was asking you to forgive her." The room exploded then, accusations flying like knives, old wounds ripped open and bleeding all over the nice clean carpet Emily had picked out, people shouting over each other, years of resentment and betrayal spilling out in an unstoppable flood. Emily sobbed something about sacrifices no one had noticed, about promises made in hospital rooms and debts owed long before I ever knew there was a ledger to balance, and Aunt Linda shouted back that secrets were poison and forgiveness was a lie. And through it all I just stood there, holding the phone, the video still waiting in my hand, heavy and silent and full of a truth I no longer knew how to carry. Because if what Aunt Linda said was true, if Mom's final act was not about vengeance but about mercy, then I had been wrong from the start. Wrong about Emily. Wrong about myself. Wrong about what it meant to make things right. Was it love that had driven her to trust me with this final, impossible task? Or was it revenge dressed up in prettier clothes, a final, cruel test to see if I would fail her one last time? I did not know. And as the shouting roared around me, as the family I had spent my whole life trying to hold together tore itself apart piece by jagged piece, I realized maybe I would never know. Maybe that was the real inheritance she had left me, not a house, not a savings account, not even a collection of old photographs and worn-out memories, but this endless, gnawing question that would follow me until the day I died. Was it love? Or was it something much, much darker? The silence after a storm is never clean, never peaceful the way poets like to imagine, because it hums with the wreckage left behind, all the broken pieces still trembling in the air, all the things you can never quite put back where they belong. When the shouting finally burned itself out, when the last accusations had been hurled like knives into the soft, vulnerable parts of people who used to love each other without thinking, when the last slammed door echoed down the hallway like a gunshot, I was left standing there alone, the phone still clutched in my hand like a relic from a war no one had won. Somewhere upstairs, I could hear Emily crying, a thin, rasping sound like someone trying to scrape themselves out from under the weight of everything they had been pretending not to feel for years. But I didn't move, didn't go to her. Because I didn't know if I was the villain she thought I was or the executioner she deserved. Aunt Linda was gone, her chair pushed back from the table, her coffee cup still half full and trembling slightly from the impact of her sudden departure. And most of the cousins and second cousins had followed her out like sheep fleeing a wolf they had never realized was in their midst all along. Some of them had looked at me with something like admiration, like I had done the brave thing by dragging all the ugly truths into the light, while others had stared at me with pure, open hatred, as if I had set fire to their childhoods with my bare hands. Maybe they were both right, or maybe they were both wrong. I sat down heavily in one of the dining chairs, the old wood creaking under my weight, and stared at the dark, blank screen of my phone, feeling older and more hollow than I ever had in my entire life. What the hell was justice, anyway, when it was soaked so deeply in blood and betrayal that you could not even tell who had hurt who first? Was it justice to tear the last shreds of our family to pieces because the truth demanded it, or was it just cruelty, revenge dressed up in a suit and tie and called righteousness because it made the guilt easier to swallow? I did not know anymore. I played the video again, one last time, because even after everything, even after the explosion, the screaming, the wreckage left in my wake, part of me still clung to the hope that maybe, buried in her final words, was some kind of answer I had missed. Some kind of key that would unlock the door to forgiveness. Her face flickered onto the screen, tired and fragile and infinitely human, her eyes full of things I would never get the chance to understand. And when she spoke, it was not with anger, not with sadness, but with something softer. Something I did not have a name for. "Mark," she said, her voice cracking just a little, not because she was afraid, but because she was letting go of something too heavy for her to carry any longer. "Mark, you have to decide what kind of man you want to be." That was it. Not an order. Not a plea for revenge or forgiveness. Not even a clear answer. Just that one last burden passed into my hands, slippery and heavy and impossibly complicated, and it was up to me whether I used it to build something new or to salt the earth behind me so nothing could ever grow again. There would be no clean ending here, no moment where everyone hugged and cried and promised to do better, no easy redemption or tidy closure to pack up and put on a shelf like a photo album gathering dust. Some of the family would always look at me and see a traitor, the one who turned a private grief into a public execution. Others would see me as the only one brave or foolish enough to rip off the mask and show the rotting skin underneath. And Emily, well, I did not know what she would see when she looked at me now, and maybe that was the hardest part of all. I stayed in the house long after everyone else had gone, walking through the empty rooms that still smelled faintly of her perfume, still carried the echoes of all the lives lived inside these walls, all the fights and the laughter and the quiet. Desperate prayers whispered into the dark. In the living room, I found one of Mom's old quilts folded neatly over the back of the couch, the stitches loose and fraying at the edges where her fingers had worried them during long nights waiting for her children to come home safe. I sat down, pulling the quilt into my lap, and for a long time I just sat there, the house creaking around me, the weight of everything I had done and not done, settling into my bones like cold rain. Maybe I had destroyed something that could never be rebuilt. Maybe I had saved us from living a lie so poisonous it would have killed us slower and crueler than any explosion of truth ever could. Maybe Mom had known that when she sent me the video, had seen the fault lines running through our family and decided to hand me the dynamite rather than let us all crumble quietly into dust. Or maybe she had simply been a tired, broken woman trying to make one last attempt at putting her house in order before she left it behind forever. In the end, it didn't matter. There were no heroes here, only survivors. And as I stood alone in that empty house, her voice still ringing in my ears, I realized maybe I was never meant to understand it. Maybe that was the real gift she left me. Not answers. Not justice. Just the heavy, aching truth that sometimes love is messy and brutal and impossible to recognize until it is far too late. And sometimes the only thing you can leave behind is the hope that someone, somewhere down the line, will do better with the broken pieces than you ever could.